And welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today, we're going to talk about Blanche of Navarre. Blanche of Navarre was born in the year of our Lord, 1331, 5 years after Joan the Fair Maid of Kent. Her father was Philip of Evreux, the grandson of Philip III, King of France, and Marie of Brabant, who has her own episode. Her mother was Joan of Navarre, daughter of Louis X, and Margaret of Burgundy. You may remember her from her mother's episode. But the short story is that her mother was sentenced to life in prison for allegedly cheating on her husband. This meant that Blanche was her own first cousin once removed. It had been hoped that Blanche would be a spare for her older brother Louis. Her parents had two girls first, 5-year-old Joan and 3-year-old Maria. Then there was 1-year-old Louis and newborn Blanche. So they were quickly on to the next pregnancy. When Blanche was 1, her mother had that spare. They had a baby, a boy, Prince Charles. We have spoken about him before. If you listen to Joan of Navarre, Queen of England's episode, she married King Henry IV, Bolingbroke. This new little baby would be her father. Baby Charles was the future King Charles the Bad of Navarre. He was pretty bad, but you can learn about all of that in Joan of Navarre's episode in season 1. In 1333, I don't know what happened exactly. Princess Joan was betrothed to Peter the Cruel. Yes, that Peter the Cruel. We've talked about him before. A lot. His daughters have an episode, Constance and Isabella of Castile. The negotiations dragged on. For whatever reason, Princess Joan was determined to be a non-viable bride. She renounced her succession rights to her younger sister Maria. Princess Joan then retired at the ripe old age of 7 to a nunnery and was granted 100 livres annually for her lifetime. Her lifetime was 51 years, for most of which she was a nun. In 1334, another princess, Princess Agnes, joined the royal nursery. But that same year, Blanche's older brother, Louis, died at the age of just 4 years old. As the daughter of the reigning royal family of Navarre, her marriage was at the top of the list for future plans. At about the age of 4, she was betrothed, but her young groom died just a couple of months later, a hazard of the time, young deaths. They needed a spare for Charles, the not yet bad. Prince Philip was probably born in 1336. I've heard whispers that he was born a couple of years earlier, but my best guess is that Philip was born when Blanche was about 5 years old, becoming his older brother Charles' spare. In 1337, when Blanche was around 6, her 8-year-old sister Maria was married to 16-year-old Peter, the heir to the throne of Aragon. Don't like that. At about the age of 9, she was betrothed to Louis, the heir of the Count of Flanders. But this, too, was canceled when her betrothed married someone else. When Blanche was about 10 years old, her mother was having her next baby at the age of about 29. Blanche's mother Joan had another prince. Prince Louis was born in 1341. The next year, around the age of 30, Queen Joan had her last baby, a princess named Joan, likely after her mother and older sister. There were a lot of Joans. Queen Joan was a 30-year-old mother of the 8 surviving royal children, 16-year-old Princess Joan, 13-year-old Princess Maria, who was already married and the Queen of Aragon, 11-year-old Princess Blanche, 10-year-old Prince Charles, 8-year-old Princess Agnes, 6-year-old Prince Philippe, 1-year-old Prince Louis, and baby Joan. The next year, in 1343, Blanche's father died when she was just 12 years old. He had been on crusade, and he had fallen ill after being shot by an arrow. He died before returning home after ignoring instructions from a doctor to change his diet. At about the age of 14, Blanche was betrothed to Peter, the heir to the throne of Castile, Peter the Cruel. Do you remember him, Peter the Cruel? Her sister was betrothed to him before he rejected her, and she retired to a nunnery. This is him. But this marriage was also abandoned in favor for the daughter of King Edward III and Philippa of Hainaut. Joan, if you remember, died of the plague at the age of 14, while en route to her Castilian betrothed. The teenage royal marriage market was a competitive scene. When Blanche was 19, they were still looking for a husband for teenage Blanche. Her youngest sister was getting married at the age of 12 to 15 years old to Gaston, the future Count of Foix. Their marriage was not a happy one. Her poetry was published in 1856 under the name Poésies d'Agnès de Navarre-Champagne. The same year Agnès was married, her mother died at the age of just 37. She died of, you guessed it, the bubonic plague, because it was going around. Then there was talk of Blanche marrying Prince John, Dauphin of France. And that marriage seemed like it was going to work. But then Joan's father, 57-year-old King Philip VI, fell in love with 19-year-old Blanche, Princess of Navarre. His wife, the queen, had died of the plague. Blanche's mother had also died of the plague. She was going to now marry the 57-year-old father of her 31-year-old former betrothed. Her old fiancé was now her new stepson. Awkward. It was reported at the time. The father took the beautiful young damsel Blanche, whom his son had wanted as a wife. The father was so attracted to her for her beauty and gracefulness that he married her, and gave his son in marriage to the damsel Blanche's first cousin. Her old betrothed married her cousin, but we'll get back to Joan I, Countess of Auvergne. And her aunt, Joan of Evreux, had been married to this king's cousin because everyone's related. Queen Blanche was not crowned queen. The plague was going around, and the last queen had died of it. It just wasn't worth the risk. Blanche married the king, and just 11 days later, her cousin married the king's son. Just 6 months after Blanche married her husband, the king died at the age of 57. According to some chroniclers, his death was due to exertion from constantly fulfilling his conjugal duties in the marriage bed. Ew. Just 2 months after the death of her husband, the Pope was pushing to have her remarried to her old betrothed, Peter of Castile. Peter the Cruel, you can't get rid of this guy. His betrothed had died 3 years earlier from the plague. It was going around. He was about to meet his lifelong mistress, Maria de Padilla, so it was probably for the best. The queen was pregnant with the late king's baby. She was not going to Castile. 9 months after the death of her husband, King Philip VI, Blanche gave birth to the king's baby, Princess Joan. And the Pope was back on the marriage train, but Blanche refused. So the Pope wrote to Joan of Evreux, her aunt, who also has an episode. The Pope wanted Joan to convince her niece to remarry. Blanche refused to remarry, despite immense pressure from the Pope. She is said to have declared, "The queens of France do not remarry," something French queens would become known for saying. She dedicated her life to raising and educating her daughter Joan, the half-sister of the new king of France, because the king is dead, long live the king. The new king was Blanche's old betrothed, King John II, her stepson, and the new queen was Blanche's cousin Joan. Stay tuned for her episode. When Blanche's daughter Joan was about 19 years old, her betrothal was arranged with Prince John, heir to the throne of Aragon, a neighboring kingdom. Joan's future father-in-law had been the Peter of Aragon that had married Joan's aunt, Maria, all of those years ago. The following year, when she was 20, Blanche's daughter, Joan, died while traveling to Aragon for her wedding. The midwife that had been sent with her as part of her entourage was accused of killing her with sorcery. But the King and Queen of France, Blanche's stepson and cousin respectively, requested that the midwife be sent back, as his deceased half-sister no longer needed her, and the Queen of France was now expecting. So they clearly didn't think she was guilty. Blanche lost her only child when she was just 40 years old. Her daughter was just 20. Her stepson was king for about 14 years, but we'll get into that story next time. He was followed on the throne by his son Charles V, who reigned for 16 years. He was followed by his son Charles VI, who we have spoken about before. He was the father of Isabel and Catherine of Valois, both princesses of France, both queens of England, and both have their own episodes. When King Charles became the king, he was just 11 years old. By this time, Blanche was Dowager Queen of France, and she was 49 years old. She was influential during the reign of her step-great-grandson / first cousin 3 times removed, because it's complicated, In 1385, when Blanche was about 53 years old, she attended the wedding of the King of France, Charles VI, to his new wife, Isabeau of Bavaria. After this wedding, Blanche withdrew to a commune in Normandy, where she lived for another 14 years. Blanche died on the 5th of October, 1398, at the age of 67. 9 years after the birth of Isabella of Valois, future Queen of England, and 3 years before the birth of her sister, Catherine of Valois, also future Queen of England. And that is where I'll leave it for now. What did you think of Blanche, Princess of Navarre and Queen of France? She became the Queen of France at 19 years old, but then her much older husband died after just 6 months of marriage, leaving her a newly pregnant young dowager queen. She spent the next 20 years with her daughter, just the two of them. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at longlivethequeenpodcast. Leave a comment or a review, or join me on Patreon for bonus content and extended episodes. This week, we're going to cover medieval New Year's over on Patreon. Long live to all the queens out there, and until next time, bye.
You'll be remembered.
Thanks for listening.